Hello, everyone. We've already got 30 people here in the webinar joining us. Before we get started, I just want to flag that there is a live transcript available in case you want to read along with us. You just have to hit the three dots that say more and show transcript. Let me know in the chat if you have any problems with that. And I'll go ahead and kick us off. So welcome to the Disability in the Newsroom webinar. This is something that I am so excited we have put together. My name is Katie Shulov. I'm the current president of the National Press Photographers Association. And I'm just going to kick us off tonight, and then I will be handling the Q&A. So if you guys have a question, go ahead and put it in the Q&A feature down at the bottom. And you can also raise your hand and I'll call on you to speak. This is a webinar that is part of a series we've been doing this year called Continuing the Conversation. This one is somewhat in honor of National Disability Employment Awareness Month. This is a topic that's really close to my own heart. My mom was born with spina bifida. I lost her last year, but she spent the majority of her life fighting for accessibility in the workplace and better visibility for the disability community. And she was president of the Spina Bifida Association of San Diego and inspired me to run for president of NPPA. And this, for that reason, is just, it's truly a dream come true for me that we were able to bring these people together to talk to you all about some really important topics that I don't think are discussed enough. And I just want to tell everyone that if you like the kind of work that we're doing here and you want to see more of it, we're doing one of these every month with a variety of ally organizations, with NABJ and AAJA. Next month, or later this month, we have one with NAHJ. We have one for students in November. So join us, go to nppa.org, and you can see all of that or become a member and support this work. So with that, I will introduce our moderator today and our co-hosting organization, the National Center for Disability and Journalism, led by Kristin Gilger. She is a Reynolds professor in business journalism at the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism and Mass Communication at Arizona State University. I was just there last week. I should have come and said hi. She served as the interim dean for the past year, and she's also the director, as I mentioned, for the National Center on Disability and Journalism. She's the co-author of the book, There's No Crying in Newsrooms, What Women Have Learned About What It Takes to Lead, published by Rowman and Littlefield. Prior to joining the Cronkite School, Gilger had a 20-year career as an editor at newspapers that include the Times-Picayune in New Orleans and the Arizona Republic in Phoenix. She has a bachelor's and master's degree in journalism from the University of Nebraska. So I will go ahead and let you take it from here, Kristin.
Thank you so much, Katie, and thank you for all your work and NPPA's work in putting this this panel together. I do lots of panels, lots of sessions, and I don't think I've ever seen quite as much interest as in this one. I mean, people just seem really excited to have this conversation. So I want to thank you all for being here, and I want to particularly move directly to our panelists because we have an amazing group of professional journalists and professionals who have a lot to say about our topic today about disability in the media, particularly as it relates to visual media, but not exclusively visual media. So I'm going to let everybody introduce themselves very quickly. We have a distinguished panel. We'll start with Amanda Morris. Amanda, just a real quick introduction.
Hi, everybody. My name is Amanda, and I am the Disability Reporting Fellow for the New York Times.
Partly through the NCDJ. So we work closely with Amanda, and this is the first disability reporting fellowship at a major newspaper in the country. So we're very excited about this. Yomi, do you want to jump in with your introduction?
Sure. Thank you for having me. I'm Yomi S. I am actually a former Newsroom reporter. I actually worked with Akili Ramses, who is the leader of NPPA now. Akili and I worked together at the San Jose Mercury News, but I wrote for a number of papers in California, in Southern California and Northern California before leaving the Newsroom professionally full-time, I think it was in 2007. And now I stick my toe back in every once in a while with freelance work. And most recently, a lot of fun, right before the pandemic, I had a column in the LA Times on disability and travel. So I'm happy to be part of this discussion. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. David.
I am David Albritton. I'm a senior photojournalist at CNN. Been there about 30 years. I started my career in Hawaii. Grew up in Hawaii, University of Hawaii graduate, and been all over the world. And a few years ago, I got too close to a bomb and was severely injured, and that's why I'm included in this lovely little group. So it's you know, an interesting thing to try to overcome things to do your job.
Thank you so much, David. Ari.
Hi everyone, my name's Ari. My name's Ari Golub. I'm a student at George Washington University. I study photojournalism there, and I'm a staffer for the GW Hatchet. I'm from Rockville, Maryland, and kind of grew up in the DC area and went to college here. And I have Tourette syndrome, and that's a pretty big part of my identity. Woo! Fuck! I'm a little nervous. So fuck! Ticking more. But I'm here to listen and share our story. So thanks for hosting.
Thank you, Ari. Another student, Evan.
Hi, I'm Evan Halpop. I have a degree, an associate's degree in photography from Madison College. And then I'm currently a senior at the University of Wisconsin-Whitewater, where I'm working on finishing up my bachelor's degree in journalism with an emphasis in broadcast, print, and web. I'm also on the autism spectrum, and I do want to see more representation of people with autism and working in news media, because it brings out the best in us too.
Thank you, Ari. Linda.
Oh, hi, sorry. My name's Linda Tirado. I'm an author and a photojournalist, most recently famous for getting shot in the face during the protests in Minneapolis last year, which is how I come to be on this panel. Weirdly, it's a lot of explosions. I am the most recent recipient of the Audubon Press Freedom Award, and most of my work is centered on economic issues and civil unrest in the States.
Thank you so much, Linda. And Katie, I don't think we have Bruce, do we?
Unfortunately, no, if you want to fill people in on why.
Yeah, Bruce Thorson, who actually I worked with for a number of years, starting back at the Statesman Journal newspaper in Salem, Oregon. Bruce was my photo editor. Bruce has an injury and he's in the hospital, so he was not able to join us tonight. But as you can see, we have a great panel. So I want to start by asking each of the panelists just to take a couple of minutes to talk about the sort of the big issues that drive them to be here tonight, the big issues that they would like to talk about. And that can be about, career opportunities, what it takes to achieve a career, especially as a visual journalist, as a person with disabilities, or how the media covers disabilities. So David, is it okay if we start with you?
Yeah, I come at it, because of the injuries that I received. Basically, I was standing a little too close to a 500-pound bomb when it went off. And I'm on surgery number 16. A couple of years ago, I had to have spinal surgery and learn to walk again, which is kind of important in my job where I'm carrying a lot of equipment and running around. And I think it's important that people don't take things at face value, that you realize that people can overcome things and adapt to things. Just saying, okay, you have to be this way to do this job. You come at it, one of my favorite things to say to people is, if you can't go through, go around. Try and find a different path to get, the job done and to, get your career moving. It's also being a father of two autistic children. I also see that we need to have more inclusion and more opportunities for people who just look at the world just a little bit differently and deal with the world a little bit differently.
Thank you, David. Linda.
Yeah, so I'm here. I mean, specifically, obviously, the disability that I got in late May 2020 is pretty recent, and so relearning how to see things and not run into cabinets on my left side consistently. I feel you very hard on that one, man. But I'm largely interested in what sort of steps we need to be taking as kind of professionals to help other people with the accommodations that they might need. Because I think so frequently journalism, and particularly visual journalism, is heavy physical labor that requires a lot of running, a lot of maybe stairs, a lot of curbs that don't have good curb cuts, things like that. So what do we as professionals need to be doing to support our colleagues instead of kind of seeing the world the way that we particularly see it? So I'm fascinated to be here and have that discussion.
That's great. And we will have that discussion. Evan, how about you?
What was the question again? Was it the first one?
Yes, the first one about sort of what brings you here. What's on your mind? What do you want to talk about tonight?
Oh, God, don't get me started. Career opportunities. I'm getting, scares me every time that I have to, think about life after being done with school. And I've taken the scenic route, as I like to call it, for finishing my bachelor's degree and my associate's degree. And it's a scary, just as a person with autism, I'm already odd within my community and people with autism because I'm not your typical autistic either. I'm always pushing my boundaries of what my limits are. I'm always trying to get better, whether that be going into loud places, big crowds, trying things that are way just way out there, like stuff that most people, even people without disabilities, probably wouldn't want to dip their fingers into or their toes into for subjects or trying something new. I've always believed that if I'm gonna make something of my life, I have to be uncomfortable, at least to a certain extent, to be able to grow. And and I didn't learn this until later in life, and I kind of wish I had, because I really love visual journalism and it means the world to me. Heck, I'd call it my my committed girlfriend now. I love it that much. But it feels like the world is still rejecting people like me in the field. It's just, I know it's probably not that way, but I don't see any others out there in visual media like me, really. And like I've seen a couple reporters, and that's about it. And one of them only works as a freelancer, as far as I'm aware.
Okay, thank you so much.
I'm just hoping there's more representation coming in and we can start something.
Yeah, what's in the future, right? Yomi.
Hi, thank you. I just, maybe by way of saying why I'm here, I've been out of the newsroom for a long time. And I'm kind of a late addition to this panel, so I appreciate being included with all of you. And I just want to say to Evan, and this is going to go to a larger point that I want to make, it is not your imagination. This industry is rife with ableism. The fact that you don't see a lot of representation of neurodiverse folks or people, like in my case, people might not be able to tell, but I'm sitting in a wheelchair, I use a power chair, and the things that I had to do just to be able to do my job as a reporter, even at a time when many newsrooms were taking on quote unquote diversity initiatives, disability was never part of those conversations. And it is because we do not as an industry actually have an analysis and awareness of ableism. So ableism is a form of systemic oppression. Ableism impacts people with and without disabilities. And what I saw often were people with non-apparent disabilities that didn't feel comfortable identifying. So in this country, people with disabilities are the largest minority. There's something like 26% of Americans identify as persons with disabilities. And yet, our industry, the journalism, the news industry does such a crappy job of covering this important demographic. Unless we're talking about pity stories or inspiration porn, we rarely see what I would call enterprise reporting, investigative reporting, human interest reporting, actual rich storytelling that talks about the range of experiences of people with disabilities at all levels and all facets of life. I mean, I think for folks like Linda and David who acquired their disabilities as adults, it's a very different experience for somebody like me who was born with a disability. And this is how I show up in the world. I can't hide my disability. I wouldn't want to. I didn't always feel that way. So the experience of disability is going to be very different depending on your positionality, your privilege, your race, your socioeconomic status, your gender, your sexual orientation, your gender expression. And you know, in some ways your education. I didn't go to J school. I fell into journalism. Sometimes I thought that some of the struggles I was having was maybe because I didn't go to J school. That wasn't it. There were all kinds of other reasons. But we just aren't doing a good job of reporting on this important demographic. And I'm excited to hear about what's happening now in newsrooms. What are we doing in terms of visual storytelling and narrative storytelling that can really get to the heart of this important demographic? We are, again, the largest minority in this country, and yet we do a terrible job of telling the story of disability as it's experienced in this country.
That's a perfect segue to Amanda, who is reporting on disability at the New York Times. Amanda.
Yeah, so I have had experience reporting in a variety of newsrooms across a variety of formats. Before the New York Times, I was working at the Arizona Republic as a multimedia reporter on science, doing video and photo. And I've also worked at CNN, the Associated Press, and NPR, as well as the Hartford Courant. So I feel like I've really gone across the gamut. And what brings me here tonight is that as somebody who was born with 2 deaf parents and with a hearing loss myself, like I've always navigated the world as somebody with a disability. And I've had to navigate the entire process from school to college to applications to early career as somebody with a disability. And I have both seen issues with coverage and experienced some discrimination myself as somebody with a disability. And I'd like to talk about how isolating it can feel when you get to a newsroom and you look around and you're the only one that you know of, right? So I think I'm here today because while I had some great like female journalist mentors, I had basically like 0 female disabled journalist mentors, or even just disabled journalist mentors. And I'm only now starting to really find and connect with a bigger community of disabled journalists, thankfully, as I've broken through in this field. But it was really hard to break through. And I want to be here to, you know, serve as somebody that can talk about these issues with people who are just entering.
Thank you. And I want to apologize for the chat. Katie, I think, is going to try to shut down the chat altogether. We'll use the Q&A if we need to.
Yeah, I'm trying to do that. I'm sorry, everybody.
All right. Yeah, it's so unfortunate.
If you've ever gotten hate mail as a journalist, you're like, you know, like this just happened.
It's so disheartening though.
Kind of feel like we're on Twitter.
One more person on who I want to give this sort of larger introduction opportunity to, Ari.
Hi all, my name is Ari. Like I said, I'm a senior, 5th year actually at GW studying photojournalism. So my identity is like I have Tourette syndrome and I'm a photojournalist and I'm also an artist and I'm also like a friend, and I'm also like a son, and all those things. That being said, I find like a lot of my trauma originates from like experiencing life through like the lens of Tourette's. And I've been like told in a lot of different ways that I'm not, one second, my phone's going off, it's really distracting. I've been told in a lot of ways that like I'm not fit for visual journalism or for this kind of job. And it's like super frustrating because I know I am, and I know who I am, and I know what I'm capable of, but I just keep hitting these major roadblocks. Like, for instance, academia doesn't mix too well with like a neurological disability, and like having like pretty intense depression, anxiety, and OCD. So like managing all of that, also trying to like live a life and pursue a career in photojournalism is really difficult. So I guess why I'm here is I want to like vocalize that and like put that through a megaphone and let people know that like it's really difficult to live every day in my shoes, but I manage somehow because I like I'm caring, I'm competent, I'm like I'm perceptive, and I understand the room, and I understand that like people see me in a very different light. When I walk into a space, people often cock their heads and start staring me down. And then I'll often get like verbally harassed and be called the R word or shut up or something like that. What we're talking about, I have Tourette syndrome. Sorry about that. Thanks for checking in. Tourette syndrome is a neurological condition characterized by vocal tics and motor tics. So I have motor tics where I have two things with my body, and I have vocal tics where I vocalize. So thank you for asking. That's a very good clarification. Yeah, so I'm out here for representation. I want to hear disabled people write disabled stories and make disabled stories. And that's what I'm all about. There's a lot more that I'm about, but that's for another time. Cool. Thank you so much.
Thank you all. I think those introductions help us get to know sort of where you're coming from in a much richer way. Again, we want the audience to be part of this. And so please put your questions in the Q&A, and Katie will be monitoring those. And Katie, you interrupt at any time if you think we should go to a question or comment in the chat. I'm going to start out with just a couple of questions. One of the things that a number of you have brought up are opportunities, right? What are the opportunities available for journalists with disabilities? And I know that Amanda was just talking before we started about the deaf community, where it's something like fewer than 40% of deaf people are employed full time. And I think employment opportunities, career opportunities are a critical issue. So my question is, why do you think that this is the issue, particularly when it comes to media employers, and what do you think they should be doing to make the workplace more open to people with disabilities? So I'll start with that, and any of the panelists, raise your hand, just jump in.
I mean, I'll have a go. To Yomi's earlier point.
Okay, you're all going to be shy. Okay, go.
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Sorry.
Go ahead, Linda.
Easily confused by technology. To Yomi's point earlier, there's a vast difference between how people perceive and treat people with different kinds of disability. So for instance, because I was injured on the job and because it was very well known, I find that when nobody's asking me to write about the things I'm a noted expert in. Now all anybody wants me to write about is, what was it like to get shot and how angry am I at the police and all of these things that are not really my wheelhouse. I write memoir, but not that kind of, I don't write trauma porn. I write memoir about things that might be traumatic. So I think that you know, it's worth noting that those jobs and the availability of jobs differs just so much depending on people's perception of how disabled they think you are and what inferences they make as to that kind of disability. I don't get a whole lot of people that are particularly willing to work with me because I only hurt my eye. And they don't see that as a whole body trauma or something that I would have to get over or that I might need accommodation for in ways that aren't just about how many hours I can stare at a screen in a day. So just before we got that discussion going, just to her point, I think that, you know, having that in mind is super helpful as well.
What about the others of you on career opportunities? What media employers should be thinking about here?
I raised my hand on the chat feature, but I'll lower it now. So in addition to having more people report on disabilities, which I am very happy to have the opportunity to do, and which I think is a great opportunity for people with disabilities to bring expertise into the newsroom, I do think there should be a lot of opportunities for people with disabilities to report on whatever it is, right? Like sports, entertainment, all sorts of things. And I think some of the biggest things employers can do, one of the biggest things I would say is to have an inclusive work culture. And that starts from like the interview process, right? So like, even when you make a job posting, I think it's like, could be really helpful if more employers started getting into the practice of writing down what types of accommodations might be able to be made for a job, so that when you see a job posting, you're not automatically disqualifying yourself from even applying because you're thinking, oh, I can't do that. Like, we have to make it clear that companies are willing to work with people with disabilities. And if we see that in the job posting, it's going to make us way more likely to apply and think we have a shot. And then in the interview process is where I think a lot of people with disabilities kind of start getting shut out, based on my own experience and based on the experience of my parents. It's where people who have maybe communication issues start to have a lot of issues, or if you're doing an interview in person, it's where a disability might become apparent for the first time, where it's not on paper. And I think it's really important to train people who are doing recruitment and who are doing interviews on like disability, not just like, oh, here's the accommodations we need to make, but also on the value that people with disabilities bring and like our perspectives and how important they are. And then the last thing, like in terms of inclusivity, is making sure that once you have disabled employees, whether or not you know that they are disabled, because not all disabilities are visible, is creating a culture in which, you know, people can have understanding and flexibility if they need to work from home for a day, or if they need to take sick time or things like that, because a lot of disabilities do impact health. And in a lot of companies, especially media companies, there can be kind of this mentality of, you know, work all the time that's not really conducive to people with disabilities doing their best work. And so I think that's kind of like one of the biggest things that I would say we need to do is like have more inclusive cultures.
Ari, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, for sure. So like, I'm not to be a preacher here, but this form of like hyper capitalism where we're always working and always like either like finding a story or finishing to a deadline, it just isn't healthy for us. And I can get really sick if I like miss a night of sleep or miss my medication or something happens along the lines of that. So to piggyback kind of off of Amanda, just an understanding with an employer that like I can work from home or do another task from home while I'm like having a really bad day with my tics would be really cool. Unfortunately, that's not really the world we live in, and I get really concerned whenever I apply for a job, because I know I'm gonna have to have that discussion with my employer on, hey, these are my expectations. This is what I'm gonna need. Like, I'm gonna, and that's a very sometimes polarizing conversation to have. I'm like often intimidated by my manager or the higher ups on like, am I allowed to ask for this? And that's been like really intimidating, especially as I'm graduating soon and like trying to find a salaried position or something to keep paying rent. I'm pretty scared, to be honest. But yeah, just accommodations in the workplace, particularly an understanding of sick leave and the fact that our disabilities affect our health greatly. Yeah.
Jenny Price in the chat asks a really good question, which is, can any of you provide a good example of an accommodation or support an employer or supervisor has given you that made a huge difference? She says she thinks it's helpful for people to understand what those things are and that they often are no more difficult or different than providing accommodations for non-disabled people.
Okay, I know, Jenny, I know this one.
Evan, go ahead.
So my supervisor in the athletics department right now, where I currently work as a student employee on an hourly basis, and he's awesome. Chris Lindicky is the dude if you want a student position, if you're a student at UW Whitewater. But he just trusts me because he sees the work, and it's more about the trust with me, that feeling that, you know, you're trusting me to be able to pull through with these things. Granted, he doesn't exactly have like the strictest deadlines. I asked for deadlines just to get me focused on getting the task done on a timely manner. But I guess I got the best of both worlds here, but for that part. But I'm still looking for something that can push me to the edge a little bit further and become better. And that's what I'm looking for. I want someone to challenge me in a way that will be productive to my overall development, but also take into consideration on how to, I know it's a tricky thing because I've had also 2 brain surgeries over the past 10 years and radiation. I stayed in school during that whole time. You can ask my mom, she's in the chat. She'll verify it.
But your point is a really good one, that you want to be challenged and you also want understanding of an accommodation when it's necessary. Yomi, I think you had something you were going to add to it.
Yeah, I was going to say, and I'm looking at some of the questions in the chat, this whole concept of, first of all, accommodations are your right as an employee. And newsrooms or news organizations are such weird places to work, right? Because like it's almost like we're kind of like in this bubble outside of the rest of the labor sector. Like so much weird stuff happens in newsrooms, newsroom culture. And I just want to say to Ari, grind culture is toxic. It is toxic for people with and without.
I can't do it. I rejected it a long time ago.
Grind culture has its roots in white supremacy and capitalism and colonialism, and it affects everybody. If you talk to a journalist who's been in the business for 40 years, ask them how they sleep, how they eat, if they drink too much, what chronic conditions they have.
If their marriages have broken up,
if their children are in therapy, if they have sought out therapy. It is not sustainable, at least, like I said, I don't know what newsrooms are like today, but the pace at which journalists are expected to work and to grind themselves down to our bloody little nubs to continue, because here's the thing with the nature of our work, it's a beast and you constantly have to feed the beast, right? So you fed the beast for today and you got to turn around the next day and do it again. It never stops. And so without, I think, political education and analysis around ableism and the way that it undergirds so much of what we do in journalism and in newsrooms, it's difficult, I think, for those who are leaders in our newsrooms and those who have the power. It's really about power dynamics as well. Who has the power to make or break your career? Who has the power to hire and fire? Who has the power to promote you? And if you have somebody who is so ignorant and bigoted, right? About, and has such a small field of vision as to what body minds can do, then it's going to be really hard to succeed under that type of leadership. So what I would say to Evan and to Ari, you need to find an ally, find a champion, find an editor that you can be honest with about your experience. I mean, they aren't all horrible, right? Find those benevolent cheerleaders and help and ask them to help you. I mean, I have an editor that I started working with when I was in college at this little Gannett paper in San Bernardino. And she has been my mentor and friend and editor for 30 something years. And she has sort of understood some of the particular tensions and challenges that I experienced, even working for her, trying to get the dang story, sometimes. It's really hard. And I think that maybe some of these affinity organizations, our journalism associations, NABJ, and the Women in Journalism, JAWS, they should really have workshops around how to talk about disability, when to disclose and how to disclose if you have a hidden disability, how to have that conversation with your manager. And I think that newsroom managers need to do some work around the issue of accommodations. Most accommodations are low tech and cost no money at all. And I'll say this last thing and then I'll shut up. Ari, you had mentioned that, you have a disability and other people do, that it can be unpredictable, right? You don't know, you might have good days and bad days.
Yeah, completely. It waxes and wanes. Like today I was actually doing really well, but yesterday was atrocious and I didn't sleep at all in the night because I have like akathisia. So I was like tossing and turning until 5 a.m.
Yeah, so you might need a day where you can work from home. And what we have, and this is what we've been saying in the disability community for decades, that most jobs can be accommodated remotely, that more people with disabilities would actually enter and stay in the labor force if we were accommodated with remote options. The business world writ large said, we can't do that. And then what happened in March of 2020? Everybody went home. Everybody got sent home and everybody did their work. Most everybody. A lot of jobs went remote and it worked out just fine. So
what you're bringing up here goes to something DJ has brought up in the chat, which I really like, which is how do you have those conversations in the newsroom and with your supervisor, as you brought up, but also just with people, your colleagues, right, in the newsroom, so that you have a common frame of reference. So that there is more understanding. How do you have those conversations? And then the other thing that you brought up, which I think is really interesting, is when do you disclose? And when you do disclose, how do you have those conversations? So anybody who wants to jump in on that, please do.
Okay. For me personally, I disclose because almost 100% of the time, because if it's a good way to root out and for those in newsrooms, do not hate me for saying this, please, but it roots me out for the wrong choices that could potentially be avoided. Because if it's not a good fit, I'll certainly know that by how they react to certain things. And I kind of use that as a testing tool to see how the people react to that. And so far, and it's just, and
it's like Sue Morrow brings up, it's how do you trust people with this information? It's a really, really difficult question.
I haven't given up on them yet.
Good for you. What about others in the group? How do you have you had to deal with this? I mean, in some cases it's obvious, right? I mean, Linda brought that up. It's disclosure you're already well enough known. They know exactly, right, what they're getting with you. Amanda, maybe you can address this.
Yeah, and I'm happy to let David and Ari jump in afterwards as well. I wanted to bring it up both for disclosure in terms of the interview process and disclosure in terms of accommodations. I've been through both. When I was in college, I by and large did not disclose. And then I switched after college because I felt a little bit more secure knowing that I had at least some experiences and some clips to kind of prove like, look, I've already done it, right? Like I can do it. And so once I had kind of done some internships, I remember the first time I publicly disclosed it during an interview was when I was interviewing for NPR, which is a radio station, right? And I have a hearing loss. So like that would probably be like the worst time to disclose. And it actually went really well, I think, because of the way I framed it. I said, look, like I have this hearing loss. Obviously, I've already done XYZ, and I've shown that I can like do XYZ, even though I have a hearing loss. And then I kind of brought up, and when I told my parents that I had an interview for NPR, they didn't know what I was talking about. So obviously, you guys have like a little bit of work to do with reaching out to like deaf and hard of hearing audiences, and I think I can be the person to help do that, right? And so that was like one example of when I really did disclose it very publicly. And then I actually found ways to kind of tie it into my interviews from there on. So when I was a science reporter in Arizona, I talked about during the interview process how people with disabilities are often the subject of, health research, and yet they're not like really focused on as like the stories, right? It's like all the scientists who are doing the work, and like not as much on the patients who are receiving said treatments, right? So I think there are ways that you can frame what you like, what your disability is in a way that serves you. I definitely think it's scary to disclose depending on what your disability is. And I think there are some disabilities that managers might be more open-minded about than others. But I've also found that it's really helpful when you ask for accommodations and trust a manager by telling them that you have this disability, to kind of be upfront about what you need, whether it's in the interview process or after you get there. Some accommodations I've asked for are quiet places where I can do my interviews, because I really cannot do interviews in the middle of a newsroom where a bunch of people are talking. I just can't understand people on the phone that way. So I like to put people on speakerphone. I like to go into another room. I record every interview I do so I can listen to it twice. And I think it makes me a more careful journalist because of it, which is what I always tell my editors. Other accommodations I've asked for are, I actually used to work at CNN, and I broke my leg while I was there, which required, I broke my leg and I sprained my ankle at the same time. So I actually did end up having to use a wheelchair for a while, and they were really accommodating about it. They let me switch from the position I was in, which was very walking heavy, to a similar position that was more desk focused. And then they also helped me with transportation costs, because I found it really hard to get to work on time trying to use the bus and then the subway and then walking like the mile that I needed to do to get to work. So that was like really, really nice at CNN. I don't know that every employee does that, but I think anytime that you can help propose solutions, or say, here's exactly what I need because I have XYZ, that can be helpful. So part of it is figuring out what is your work process. And then last but not least, I did have like this one issue once where I had a manager that sat behind me and would get really annoyed at me every time I was like, what? Because they would start talking to me and I couldn't hear them. And I'd be like, what? And they'd be like, you need to start listening better. And I'd be like, I have this hearing loss. And a really easy fix for that would have been just to sit me somewhere where I was either facing them or next to them and just change my seating. And that would have been so simple. And that manager ended up not being very great because they seemed to just blame it all on me not listening versus me not being able to listen. But eventually it got worked out because I got switched to a much more understanding manager.
What you're really talking about is advocating for yourself in the newsroom. David, do you have anything to add to this? How have you advocated for yourself in your newsroom?
Well, one of the things that I was going to say is know if you're already working somewhere, know the company's policies, read the employee handbook or whatever they have online now, read it, know what's going on. I mean, because sometimes they have programs that are going to help you with your problem that are already in place, that if you haven't read what they've already put out there, and if you don't ask for it, they're not going to give it to you. I've had, when I first came back after my injury, I had, a couple of producers going, well, maybe he can't do this anymore. Maybe he's, and I basically had to prove myself all over again. But as I've gone along, I've gotten a lot more confident and I know what I need and what I'm supposed to have. Like I have no cartilage left in my wrist. So I had to get a pistol grip for my camera because I can't do this because it doesn't work. There's no cartilage there. And if I do that, I'm in like a level 9 pain all day. So I was able to say, hey, I need this. I have a documented disability. I need you to get this for me. I need this pistol grip. And they got it for me because I knew what my rights were and I knew what the company's policies were. That's an important thing, knowing what you're facing when you go in. But that's a little bit different when you're going in an interview process. I luckily have been at CNN for 32 years. I haven't had to interview. I've interviewed for internal jobs, but no outside jobs. And people here know what's going on with me.
Yeah.
Do you mind if I follow up with that?
Yeah, Ari, go ahead. And then Linda, I think you wanted to say something.
Yeah, I find that depending on the workplace, I can feel like I'm like fighting for my accommodations to be met. I've worked at like one like coffee shop a few years ago, and I told them I had Tourette's and I told them what was going on, but they kind of worked me like a dog, and whenever my tics were bad, they would just put me in the back to wash the dishes, which like wasn't cool at all. And I was trying to talk to the manager and tell them that I needed like a break or 2 or 3 more small breaks throughout the day just to like manage my tics and get myself back to a baseline. But he was super intimidating and just like rude and patronizing. And then I worked at this other coffee shop bakery for the last year, and I interviewed there, and the managers didn't actually know what Tourette syndrome was, but I did a good job of advocating for myself and telling them what my expectations are. And this was, I think, 2 or 3 years later. So I learned a few lessons from them. And I kind of broke down Tourette's into its definition and then explained how like my tics function at other cafes and how I've done this. And they were super trusting of me. And when it came down to was like trust, like I'm not gonna try to take your accommodation away because I think you're like trying to cheat the system somehow. Because there is this mentality in a lot of ableist culture where people think that people with disabilities are just trying to like game the system, which is like freaking ridiculous. And just like the amount of lengths you have to go through to think that's true. But pretty much I've just found that it's really hit or miss based off of the employer and based off of your like manager and their manager, and how your disability is gonna translate, at least Tourette syndrome. Piss! Woo! Imagine that young down in a newsroom, like it's my reality. And I guess trying to figure out how I can console myself and figure out how to navigate journalism with Tourette syndrome is very difficult, and I'm still learning.
Yeah, but what you're saying about educating and building trust is really important. Linda, go ahead.
Just kind of building on all of that, it's also really important when you're thinking about journalism not to equate it necessarily with a newsroom, because what we know is that a good portion of journalists are going to be freelancers. They're never going to get a staff job. If they do, it'll be, student papers, maybe first in their career. And then there's not going to be a staff job for them. And so asking for accommodations as a freelancer is a very different animal than asking for accommodations as an employee. And I've found that a lot of my friends that do work in journalism and do have disabilities have found that freelancing is actually the accommodation that they kind of give themselves, because it's not great as far as knowing where the food is going to come from, but it does mean that you can pick and choose which stories you want to cover, how you want to cover them, which editors you like to work with, which ones know you and you trust, in kind of a way that a more formal or a more corporate capacity of having that employer relationship, you can run into a situation where they won't or can't give you the support that you need. But as a freelancer, you can kind of advocate for yourself in different positioning. I'm not saying it's necessarily better or worse. I've never worked for a newsroom, and I don't think anybody would ever hire me for one. I say fuck way too often, like just in public, and you cannot stop my tweets. And they're like, a good portion of my career has been built on not self-censoring and in fact being very aggressive for what any, like Gannett would never want me as a representative, but they're happy to take my freelance pieces. And I think that talking about like accommodations and freelance work as well, and not just focusing on the newsroom is so critically important, because the vast majority of people who are coming into journalism are going to wind up working in some sort of freelance capacity. And so like there's this disconnect between how that works, because you've got two people on this panel that were injured at work, and we had very incredibly different experiences because I didn't have any health insurance. I didn't have a job to go back to. I'm the only wage earner for a family of 4. So taking off any time of work plus the medical bills has been like this huge added weight that I wouldn't have if I worked in a newsroom. But at the same time, during my recovery, and while I've gotten used to how I navigate the world now, I haven't had a single deadline that I didn't self-impose or that I didn't choose. And so it's just kind of a very different animal. And I think it's worth noting that as we're talking about newsroom culture, we're largely talking about corporate culture, and freelance is like a whole big, wide, jumbly circus of world outside of what you can expect from somebody who is an actual employer rather that you're a contractor for.
And Yomi, I saw you nodding during this.
Yeah, just agreeing and appreciating the discussion. I've worked in newsrooms for a long time, and then I've been a stringer. I've been a freelancer. I much prefer picking and choosing when I want to write and for what publication. As fun and thrilling as it was to have my column in the LA Times, that's like every month. I'm like, oh God, I got to do this every few weeks on top of my full-time job. So it was just a work-life balance thing for me. But not everybody can survive freelancing. And so the struggle is real, I think, for freelancers. And I have a lot of respect for people who choose that path.
And for visual journalists, particularly, freelance is a very common path. So I think this is a really important point. I want to switch the conversation a little bit here to content, to how the media covers disability. And Brian Farley asked a great question about, how can imagery in journalism help with changing the perceptions of people with disabilities? Does anyone want to jump in on that? Yeah, go right ahead, Yomi.
And just so years ago when I was at the Mercury News, I was actually on kind of the beginning board of directors for NCDJ. Suzanne Levine had started NCDJ in San Francisco. And it was at that time that we were just coming up with the language guide around disability. So that was a long time ago. I don't know if newsrooms are actually using that. But in terms of visual storytelling, I would say, look for something that's interesting. Show people with disabilities doing everyday things. I think the biggest way to counteract inspiration porn, and when I say inspiration porn, I don't want to assume that everybody knows what I mean. Inspiration porn is the stupid story that we see every year around prom time or the homecoming dance, where, oh, the able-bodied student, asked the disabled student to the dance, and now everybody feels good about themselves, and let's write a story about it. That's inspiration porn. So I think that we should show people with disabilities living life. We work, we raise families, we garden, we struggle. Right? We're organizers and activists. We are in every sector. I mean, we talk about, there's a lot of people that throw around this buzzword intersectionality. Disability intersects every single group, right? Every area of life, every race, every gender. We say in community, and when I say community, I mean the disability rights, disability justice space, that we are the only minority in this country that anybody can join at any time.
And probably will.
And will, if we live long enough, most of us will acquire disabilities in life. And so I think that showing people with disabilities doing all kinds of things, not just as objects of pity or inspiration, there's so much more in between there. And I just think it's kind of lazy storytelling when we don't do that.
I completely agree with that. To add on to it, with people with autism, specifically, since that's the area I dig into the most, I know way too many people with autism that have yet to reach or even scratch what they're meant to do with their lives. And I would not call myself an inspiration by any means just because I got into a university. That's rather stupid because, well, first of all, we should be in anyone should be able to get into a university or a technical college to begin with. And there should be some route for them to get a degree or a certificate. I know there's limits for some people who have more severe disabilities, but I am not going to dive into that because it's not right for me to talk about something that I don't know completely about. With the more, I'm talking about more people that I identify with that are able to comprehend things on a deeper level. I know that I can rock with the best of the photojournalists at my school right now, or the other photographers that go to my school that are both professional and students and also teach there. I've been said by my teachers that I should be the one teaching one of the introductory photography classes at Whitewater, and that scared me at first, and then I started to wonder about it, and then I realized, well, when I came in talking about how I got my camera system for what I use for cameras with each lens, and for each shoot or each type of shoot for either the student newspaper or athletics, I got down to an exact science now on how many megapixels a camera has, or what their shutter speed is, and what the f-stop on a lens is. It's that just made them think a little bit further, and I want to show that I have a lot more in me that I feel I can give to the workforce after college, and that's the end game. That's my end game, and I have such a long list of a bucket list that's ever growing. I'm gonna have to live to 200. So
Yeah, Evan, I don't know about anybody else, but I just want to hire you now. So but Amanda has her hand up. Amanda, jump in on this question of covering people with disabilities.
Yeah, so I've done some coverage of disabilities before I started at the New York Times, but I really have appreciated this opportunity to really delve in. And I think it's such a big, complex community that I think one of the things I really want to caution people is to treat every single story on disability as kind of a learning opportunity, both visually and writing wise, because every disability is going to be slightly different, even within a group or an umbrella of disabilities, right? Like there's different types of ways that people experience the same condition sometimes. So first of all, don't go in assuming you know things about your subject, and I think really have an open mindset to listen. And then the other thing I want to say is one thing that we always say one thing we always do at the New York Times is for disability, we like to ask people how they are described, like how they describe themselves, whether that's identity first language or person first language, but also what the actual terminology they use, because some people prefer more like medical terminology and some people don't. And it can be really confusing and complex. So in addition to asking people how they self-identify, I would tell like any visual journalist to also make sure when you're photographing somebody that they are comfortable, right? Because a lot of times with disabilities, there might be certain aspects that people don't necessarily want shown to the world as if they're like in a circus, right? Like depending on what the disability is. I know that I've done photos with people who have like more visual and apparent disabilities where they didn't want that to be the focus of the photo. And I think no matter what you do, whether it's writing or radio or a photo, you really want to do work that goes beyond the disability itself and like preserves the dignity of the person with the disability as a person, right? And not just reducing them into this one stereotypical image of, somebody in a wheelchair or whatever. Like I think to build on what Yomi said, like really show them doing like what they would be doing, like photograph them like you would other subjects, like cooking dinner or like playing basketball or whatever the story is kind of about, make it about that in the photo too. And I also want to build on what she said in terms of going beyond certain narratives. I think even within narratives, the language choices we use when we talk about those with disabilities can be paternalistic without intending. This is just from my experience working with other reporters who may have phrased things in a way that they thought was neutral, but in a way that was actually through their perspective and perhaps slightly paternalizing or like framing disability in a certain way. Like, for example, using the word, oh, somebody quote unquote suffers from disability versus somebody has a disability. And somebody might not even notice that that's not really neutral language to say that somebody's suffering or that somebody, like some of the language that you think might sound neutral doesn't sound neutral to somebody with a disability. So either, get up to speed by reading and going to events like this and learning about it, or maybe, in certain instances, if you think it's appropriate and if somebody is willing to, it might be worth having somebody with a disability in the newsroom read over your story to double check to make sure that there's nothing that you might have missed that might be offensive, because there can be a lot of nuances and it can be tricky.
So 2 things real quick about what Amanda said. One, please use the NCDJ style guide, which we just updated again this summer, which helps with those language choices. It's not real dictatorial. There's a lot of nuance here, but I think it provides some really good guidance. And the second thing she said that I think is really important is the diversity of the newsroom. Because it's like any other intersectionality, right? Any other diversity, that if you don't have people with disabilities in the newsroom, you're going to be missing things. And I know, Yomi, you have to leave pretty soon, but so I want to turn to you before you have to leave.
Thank you so much. I do have to leave, but this has been a lot of fun. And I just feel honored to be on the panel with all of you. I'm excited for the young journalists who are represented here to see what you do in the world, because we need you. We need your voice. We need your vision. We need your stories. We need your approach. We need your heart. We need your dedication. And so I'm rooting for all of you. And there was a question in the Q&A about what J schools can do. I mean, you are training, right? People who are going to go out and help shape the communities that they serve through the stories that we tell. And, that's what we do. That's why I got into, that's why how the journalism bug bit me. And so educate about this population. Invite people with lived experience, both in journalism and in disability, to provide political education around our movements, around ableism, to help students develop soft skills around how to talk about their disabilities, how to self-identify. There are so many people, colleagues and comrades that I've met in this field who do not want to disclose their disabilities because they're afraid of retaliation, they're afraid of being pigeonholed or ghettoized into certain jobs or losing their jobs. And the truth is, for me, disability is a political identity as well as the way that I experience the world. And we need more people to join our ranks, to step forward and say, actually, I'm part of this population too. And so I encourage everybody to do that. And I thank you for having me.
Yomi,
Thank you so much.
Yomi, that's the next revolution.
It is. There's a
It
whole like movement going on that nobody's even covering. It's so dope.
Trust me.
I hope that
Trust me.
somebody gets on it and tells the story.
The next revolution.
All right.
Yeah.
Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Yeah,
you,
Yomi
Yomi.
talked about it as a political movement. It's also a cultural identity
I
that
mean,
I think is largely not recognized by the media. Go
Yeah.
ahead.
yeah, sorry. So, why am I apologizing every time I talk? I'm not sorry. I'm here. We're doing this. I guess, where was I? Media, sorry. Ask the question again. I'm sorry.
Well, let me ask a different question, actually, because I just really like it. So Jeff Kinney asked a great question. Have any of you had experiences in which you or your employer have been able to leverage the fact that you're differently abled in order to access to stories sources who
Yeah.
might otherwise not have talked to you? It's a really interesting question.
Yeah. Sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt, but
No. Go ahead, Ari, you start.
I've had employers leverage me because I'm the token or minority disabled person that actually identifies on the job application. So I've been the 7 or 8% of disabled workers in the company, which is like really frustrating and not feeling supported. I haven't felt like my disability's been leveraged. Maybe in terms of like my charisma,
David, how about you? And any reaction to that question?
Well,
No,
I
I'm sorry.
not really been a leverage situation, but it's more of an empathy situation. Like I was able to go to Oklahoma City and cover some of the bombing victims and some of the children that had been injured and some of the people that had been affected by the bombing. And my experiences of being injured and having to overcome it and having to deal with it on a daily basis made me a lot more sympathetic and a lot more accepted by them because they saw somebody who understood what they were going through, not somebody who just came in, oh, okay, you got hurt, all right, whatever, move on. And that's hard sometimes because people, the further you get away from when you were injured and when you were disabled, if you're not born that way, people tend to start forgetting and start not really realizing that still affects you every single day.
Wow, that's really interesting. Linda, have you had any such experience?
Yeah, exactly that same thing over again, except for instead of a bombing, it's a shooting. And so particularly I found that specifically as a white journalist that covers civil unrest, which is so often bound up in white supremacy and in the way that we enact violence on people who aren't white. I'm not going to say it's easier to cover, but there's a certain amount of, oh no, you really are not going to write the same bullshit story that we've read 30,000 times. And there's a strong distrust of the media and of the press amongst protest communities, and particularly younger Black folk who are out in the streets and they know that this is civil disobedience and they know that the law will come on them, and they have to be able to trust the people that they're speaking to if they want to, if the story story's going to be told, they've got to cooperate with somebody, but who can you trust when everybody that's trying to cover the story doesn't look like you, is potentially hostile, and even if they mean well, they might come in with the same thing that we're talking about disability here. There's a lot of that goes on in coverage of racial issues in America too, where white people are like, well, this is totally neutral language, and everybody like else that's reading it is like, no, it's not though. And so it certainly has been, I have less hoops to jump through to be trusted by somebody, because there's this assumption that now that I share this instance of police brutality, that I'll somehow be more able or more capable of telling a story that they identify with. So it's kind of the same thing. It's not really like, I'm not skipping the line or anything. It's just, there's like 5 levels that you don't have to explain to somebody if that person already knows that, you know, because where there's just an ease in some of my subjects that wasn't there before, where I might have had to go through some motions and prove some things and say, oh, look up, you know, you can look up all of my stuff. Here's my social media, this, that, and the other. And now I'm like, oh no, I got shot by the cops. They're like, ooh, okay. So anyway, we're going and like, cool. So there's been a certain amount of that. I will also say that when I have been leveraged, and I think that I'm not trying to compare my work or my career or my trajectory to anybody else's, because, but there's a certain amount of, oh, we've got the Press Freedom Award lady is going to write for our outlet. Like there's a certain amount of chips in certain journalism circles where like, oh, now I'm a get. And I found that I've been leveraged a lot more that way, where somebody will be like, oh, come and write this story. We don't even care what you write about. We'll just like, you know, just write for us, which is actually really demoralizing and really tokenizing, and very much, oh, we got the blind chick is going to write, like, and you can always tell when editors are doing that, because they start out with, well, we saw with such horror what happened to you, and you're so brave, and would you write for us? We were thinking you'd be perfect. And then it'll be something that isn't in my wheelhouse. That's not what I do, but it's what they think I should be doing. So when I've been leveraged, it's largely been because they're trying to get other people to think that I agree with the way that they're doing things, because they find value in that, even though I don't necessarily find value in that. That said, I got medical bills to pay, so I shut up and take the money. Like I'm easy to buy. Please try to buy me. I would love for you to bring it. But yeah, it's very much, it's not that somebody's trying to trade on it necessarily. When I'm able to cover stories that maybe would be more difficult, it's that you just skip a lot of the conversation of having to be like, do you understand what I'm going through? Could you possibly understand what I'm feeling? Because, well, it's literally on my face. Like you can't avoid the fact that I know what this is. So that's been an interesting dynamic for sure.
So many people have asked me.
I want to thank both.
Sorry,
I want to thank both you and David for sharing those stories, because I had never thought about this before. And I want to thank Jeff for asking the question. Amanda, I think you wanted to get in on this. Please go ahead.
Yeah, I think it kind of goes back to what I'm saying earlier about advocating for yourself, is like also figuring out how to leverage your own experiences. I think for me, a lot of what I find is that very much what David said, like of the empathy and everything, but also thinking a little differently, having had different experiences in life. I think my biggest leverage to offer to a newsroom is usually like an unconventional way of thinking about a subject, or even just thinking of things that other people might miss. I think that's the biggest thing, is like once you experience the world an entirely different way, you're going to catch things that other people might not even think about. Like it wasn't until I had like broken my leg and sprained my ankle at the same time that I started noticing issues that I never even thought twice about when I could walk, right? And so like in my role now, like I've been able to think of different angles on things like climate change and wildfires, but also on things like returning to school. And like I had done a whole story that really looked at different experiences that students with disabilities were having and in loving working remotely, while others have hated working or learning remotely, right? So I think one piece of leverage we bring is literally just new ideas and different ideas. And then another piece of leverage we bring is to build on what David is saying, like a level of trust. And I think, Linda, you touched on this as well. There's this level of trust and this cultural understanding too, because especially within the deaf and hard of hearing community, we really have like a separate way of doing things, a separate way of communicating, a separate language. And that affords me access, just the fact that I can use sign language, or just the fact that I can understand what an IEP plan is, right? An individualized education plan. Like I just kind of get it, and I can be up to speed really fast. Like I don't have to spend a day or two just doing research on the history of like the disability rights movement. I already know that Berkeley is the cradle of the movement, right? And like I don't have to spend a day looking up, oh, were there other disasters in the past where people with disabilities were disproportionately impacted? I remember Katrina, and I remember that people with disabilities were disproportionately impacted, and that's something that I'm always going to remember. And it's kind of more at the front of my mind because of who I am as a person. But I found that because of that level of trust and that level of understanding, people are a lot more willing to open up to me. And also it can be a lot quicker just to get interviews, especially within the deaf and hard of hearing community, because you don't have to set up an interpreter, which can take like a week. So if you don't need to take a week to set up an interpreter, you can just go right to it.
Thanks, Amanda. Katie, how much time do we have left?
We have about 12 minutes left.
Okay. I want to get in one more question here from Shelley. And then I want to let each of the panelists sort of wrap up however they would like to with what they haven't gotten to say yet. But Shelley asked a really good question about our newsroom collects sources, diversity data on race and ethnicity, gender, age, etc. Shelley, you might be in public radio, I'm guessing. What are your thoughts about adding disability identification to such data collection? Is it valuable, or is it more problematic to ask sources about their disability status? I've run into this question as well. At the Cronkite School, we have a student news service, and they trying to start collecting data on disability and really wrestling with this issue. So I'm really interested in your advice and comments on this, if anybody would like to weigh in.
Oh, should I start? Okay.
Sure, go ahead.
All right. Gosh. I guess it starts out with is the person comfortable? Like just letting them, just ask them first, and then but with the ethics behind it, I do feel that just having that data can help just not only newsrooms understand disabilities better, but also just the community at large understand what's going on in the world with people with disabilities. Because like what was it, Yomi was it, that said that it was like a quarter of United States population, was it, that has a disability of some form. That's a lot of people, and that's enough to really have like a need. And we should really be thinking about the moral obligation from ourselves to be able to ask that, I guess, but be human enough to understand that not everyone is gonna feel that they're ready for that next big step into an unknown world, really.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
makes
Anybody else have thoughts on this? And I mean, the intent is good. You want to track your disability, right? You want to track your whether your intentions are being fulfilled. You want to be more diverse. You want to disabled people in your sources. But it's that question of, are you outing people, and should you out people? Should you even ask them?
I think this one's easier than people are making it. Because there is nothing wrong with saying, hey, as part of our thing and our commitment to covering like real people that have real stories, we're just asking folk to answer whatever questions you're comfortable with, because that like gives people the opportunity to be like, I want to self-identify or I don't. The treating it as though it's some sort of like major ethical question is almost very otherizing, because you wouldn't think twice about being like, well, would you mind, we're committed to diversity in the newsroom, would you put down your gender affiliation if you're comfortable doing so? And it's just
that's a really good point, Linda. Yeah, it's a good point.
I mean, because the thing is I've got this really visible disability on the front of my face, but then I've also got mental issues and I'm not neurotypical. And I don't talk about those things very much because they aren't the thing that people engage with me on. But depending on who is asking and in what circumstance, maybe I want to disclose that, maybe I don't. I'm stuck with the visible disability, but just being like, hey, we'd like to cover, people with a more diverse background. Could you just add, here's 3 questions. If you're comfortable answering them, great. If not, don't. But the kind of agony about, is it even ethical to ask? Like, well, there's nothing wrong with me. I just have these other issues in my brain and with my body. There's nothing wrong with that. It's like asking me, I don't know, do I identify as a woman or a man or somewhere in between? Or like, who do I think my sexuality is that is a political issue that I would like to give you that information, even though it's intensely personal. And we talk about those things with such ease. And so to make disability something that we're like, well, we're afraid to talk about it or ask about it as though it's a normal part of the human experience is almost offensive to me, because you mean well, but the whole point of the savior complex is when people mean well and they're afraid to treat you like a real human being. Does that really come off as being well? Or is that fetishizing it in a way? Is that making it weird? Now, do I have to deal with your feelings about it? Just put it on the questionnaire next to like, well, how do you identify yourself? What do you identify as? What's important to you? Who do you want to be in the world? And some of that's private and some of that's public, and it's up to you to decide what that is. It's not that big of a deal. It's fine.
Yeah,
I love your answer. Thank you, Linda.
I'm gonna piggyback off Linda really quick. Choosing how you identify and how you disclose is completely your decision. But in my case, like, I walk into a room and for 5 minutes it could be fine and I just pass it as neurotypical. But the moment I yell, fuck, piss, that really loudly, it automatically, everyone cocks their heads and starts to pay attention to me. And I've had to realize how to navigate that situation. And what that usually means is being like, hey, it's cool, I have Tourette syndrome. And when I'm actually talking to an employer, it comes down to like, hey, I'm an open book, ask anything you want. Because I know that they're gonna have so many freaking questions because my condition is so out there in terms of like the human brain. I don't know. I find that it's important for an employer and it's important for me to feel comfortable talking to the employer and being like, hey, this is how it is. This is what Tourette syndrome is like, and you need to be okay with that. And you also hopefully won't make it weird, as Linda was saying. And when it comes down to that, just having care and trust and confidence in that conversation. And that's really a case-to-case basis, depending on the manager or the editor.
Very good. Thank you.
I'd like to see if I can piggyback off of that as well. Like, everything that they said, yes. Like Linda, Ari, like, yes. I think the issue is less, oh, should we be asking? And the issue is, why aren't we asking? I think there's so many journalists with
Thank
disabilities.
you.
Yes, there's so many journalists with disabilities that have been asking about this for a long time, myself included. At every company I've ever worked at, I've asked, can we start tracking this? Because the biggest problem that I think we're facing as a community of journalists is we don't know how many of us there are. We don't know exactly. We know that there's underrepresentation just because we know that we're underemployed as a group anyway, but we don't know exactly how underrepresented we are in the newsroom. And if we don't know exactly what the numbers are, and if we don't know what the experiences are, we can't fix it. We can't say, okay, like we clearly have an underrepresentation. Here's how much we need to, like, you know, overcome. And we can't look at the intersectionality of like different, you know, racial groups within disability and making sure that we're representative of that too. But like if we don't know who's disabled in the newsroom, we also can't track whether they're making less money, whether they're having a harder time in newsrooms because of lack of accommodations or discrimination. And there's no way of formalizing all of these experiences, and it makes us further isolated. It makes all of us feel, I don't know how common this is, that what I'm going through in this position or in this job. And then we're just left literally to figure it out on our own. And I think tracking it is going to be the only way to hold companies accountable. And I kind of think that while HIPAA is a consideration and while privacy is a consideration, as long as you make it a voluntary disclosure and you're not like digging through people's medical records to do this, I don't see an issue, because I kind of think that perhaps the tendency might be good and, oh, we want to respect people's privacies, but I also think it could also mask real problems. And maybe the tendency is to mask the problems rather than to look at them head on. And I kind of think that newsrooms in general need to get a lot more comfortable discussing disability, not just as a medical term, but as an identity.
Thank you so much, Amanda. I'm going to count that as your last word because it was such a great piece of advice. But I want to go back to the other panelists, and we only have like 3 minutes. So very quickly, if you are going to give a piece of advice, what would it be? And David, can we start with you?
My piece of advice would be, don't give up. If you can't go through, go around. Try to figure out what works for you, and try to, as Nomi said, try to find an advocate. Try to find somebody that'll work with you and will help you and help you move forward in your career. And, you know, having the door slammed in your face doesn't have to be the end of it. Just keep going, keep moving forward.
Thank you. Ari, do you have a piece of advice that you want to share?
Just to trust yourself and trust your instincts, and trust the process.
Evan.
If you want real results in the newsroom for change and diversity, it starts with hiring a person with a disability, because not only can you get, you know, like I said, like everyone has spoken, we come in all shapes, sizes, backgrounds, of all types, and in many ways, you're knocking out a lot of objectives for hiring practices as well if you hire a person with a disability, because you can, it's just, we put our hearts and souls into our work, and you'll probably get a lot more than you realize you're getting with just hiring one of us, and you'd be making a world of difference, not just to us, but also to the people that we will be eventually reporting stories about.
Great. Linda, you get the last word.
Well, hell, let me make them good then. Journalism is scarier and more frightening and bigger and better. And the only thing that is going to make change is the fourth estate operating properly. And it is so much bigger than you hear about in J school. And there are so many more opportunities from so many different directions. So all you have to do is find something you care about and tell the story. And keep telling the story and do it wherever you can, however you can, with anybody you can. And along the way, you will figure out that you already were a journalist. You were just waiting for somebody to tell you that you were. There is nothing that we can't do if we tell stories properly. And the fact that we keep talking about how to do it a little bit better is probably one of the best things and one of the greatest gifts that any of us could ever have.
I want to give a shout out to Catherine Stewart for also getting this rolling too. She listened to me when I brought this up, and I really, without her listening, this would probably not have come together so fast. And I owe her a lot for this coming together so quickly. So.
I think that we all owe you a lot for.
There you go, Katie. I'll turn it back over to you to.
Thanks. I wasn't sure if you were frozen, but I just, to turn
I was, but go ahead.
To turn that on its head, we owe all of you a lot for being here tonight and speaking up about a topic that I just don't think we've talked about enough. And like we all just learned, we need to talk about it more. And that started right here tonight. So thank you for being part of that. And I put this in the chat, but we're gonna have this recording up on the NPPA's brand new YouTube channel. I tried to get that project off the ground in time to have this recording on it, thanks to one of my wonderful board members, Victoria. So she's standing by. We're gonna try to get it up tonight. I feel like I learned so much. I apologize to the 4 or 5 of you whose questions we didn't get to, but it would be wonderful to continue the conversation. And after all, that is the name of this series. So please don't hesitate to reach out. You can always send me an email directly at president@nppa.org. And thank you all so much for being here.
Thank you all.
Thank you.